Well, welcome everybody to our talk on exercise and fatigue and MS. And I just want to say thank you for all the organizers of this talk, the Rocky Mountain MS Center, Kelsey and Peter. Thank you so much for helping in today's presentation. And then everybody out there that's going to be viewing this, and hopefully you get a lot of information that, if it's a lot of confirmation of what you're already doing, that's fantastic. However, some of this might be new and or supporting, what you already are doing, or what you've heard out there from clinicians or from, YouTube or, videos that you've seen, or going to Google. Hopefully we can consolidate this in a fairly short period of time and very knowledgeable information. So it is my pleasure to begin the talk. So from my over 20 years experience working with people with MS and working with the Rocky Mountain MS Center since that time, I'm hoping to bring you a fair amount of information that I've gleaned, that I've learned from patients just like you, and from my colleagues, and then also from my experience in research as well. I do not have any professional disclosures at this time related to this presentation. And also, I just want to say the only disclaimer is that I do have a bias that this is something that I feel is extremely important. So I am biased that everything I say is fantastic in this realm of exercise in MS. First of all, everything that I'm going to suggest are guidelines, but the very first thing you want to do before you start, initiating a new exercise or exercising at all, you want to consult with your primary care practitioner for your general medical health, and then also your primary MS practitioner to make sure that with MS, you are safe to exercise in the realm that is suggested. And then also, as you start, it would be the best situation if you were able to initiate under supervision and guidance from an exercise professional, and optimally, those individuals that have history of working with people with neurological related conditions, especially MS, because there are some idiosyncrasies that go along with exercise in MS. So, the one thing that we know that as of yet, we do not have a cure for MS, and that is as yet. So then obviously there's progression of the disease, and with that becomes disability. So there's three main areas that I feel are the reasons for the progressive disability in MS. Obviously the ongoing disease activity itself, but being under the supervised care of skilled MS frontline providers, you are to have their best disease-modifying therapies and drug-related care, thus ceasing as much as the activity in that disease activity as possible. But then the other two are something that could be added to the list of why there's progressive disability in people with MS. The last one there is age-related loss of function. As long as you're living and you're going through years and decades of your life, we all on this planet are going through changes in our neurological system, and if left alone, are going to result in advanced disability as it relates to age. And then that one in the middle is the one that we're going to focus on primarily in this talk, of course, is the disuse and deconditioning aspect. And this is starting to become known as a possible significant contributing factor to the onset of progressive disability in people with MS. Sedentary activity, it is no surprise that human beings, and unfortunately those that reside in the United States, are significantly inactive. And thus, I know that we're currently going through a viral pandemic, but sedentary behavior has been a pandemic and especially an epidemic in this country. And should be something that we focus on as a disease itself. And unfortunately, historically and continued, people with MS are more sedentary and less physically active for multiple reasons. And there are barriers to engage in physical activity. And hopefully we can go over some of those areas that we can maybe help with the barriers to engage in exercise on a more regular basis, because it is extremely important. If we go back to the most seminal article out there, it goes way back to 1996. The late Dr. Pettijohn did a first study of exercise, primarily aerobic exercise, in people with MS. It is the first documented, peer-reviewed article and study that showed that it is acceptable, feasible, and effective for people with MS. So we're not talking about just yesterday's news. We're talking about over a couple decades of knowledge, but we are still at times spinning our wheels. I thought I'd be just a little bit more whimsical and create my own little graphs. And so I got out some graph paper and put my thoughts down. So if I were to be more dynamic, I'd be showing this to you as a group in real life time, but we'll go ahead and start with the graph in stationary time. So what we have on the axis on the left is health level, so the level of health or health status. And then the continuum on the bottom is health span. It's sort of a somewhat new term. Instead of lifespan, knowing that we have a certain lifespan and all of us have termination of that at some given time, and hopefully that's down the road. But there's also a concept of being more healthy during that lifespan. So I'm going to flip it around and use this new term of health span. And so in general, there's a red line there, and I've got the arrow though that shows over time, you start at a certain higher level of health status. And then over time, when you are not engaging in anything that really is to augment or improve your health over time, with multiple sclerosis especially, there's going to be a reduction of your health span and also possibly your lifespan. So we're going to start with that first diagram of left alone, doing absolutely nothing to increase your health or your physical and or even mental health. You're going to have a downward spiral effect. So the recommendations come from multiple sources, and it can be, this is where it can be confusing, because when you look at a number of 150 minutes per week of activity coming down to about 30 to 60 minutes per day, it can feel, especially if you have not engaged in physical activity and exercise as of yet, that's a daunting number. And there's a resource that has indicated that exercise is medicine. So to understand that how to engage in exercise, how to improve your physical activity and then your health, it is a prescription, just like a drug. So we have to understand that it should be taken serious, and it should be thought of as more of a long-term medical condition that needs to be treated as such, like a drug that is a long-term drug that is taken for a long period of time, but is based on a dosage. And in exercise, there's different doses that we're going to talk about in the next slides. But important is that it is just as if it were be something that you would take as a drug. And modes of exercise can be free living physical activity. However, one thing that stands in the way usually, and number one symptom, as everybody pretty much knows, is fatigue. So symptomatic fatigue is upwards about 85% of people with MS have symptomatic fatigue, and that's lethargy. That is just, I can't get my rear end off the couch and I just cannot move. I really cannot get myself motivated to go. So there could be a psychological, mental, and emotional aspect to it. And there's also a performance fatigability that I'm going to focus on more, but to know that fatigue that is more of a symptom and a feeling, a perception of fatigue can also be something that's improved with physical activity and should be understood that it is also a hurdle. But I'm going to go through more so of the performance fatigue to show you sort of how I put it into more of a flow of what it looks like for a person with MS that attempts to just be a little bit more physically active. This might be as you're ambulatory, you're thinking, I'm going to walk for exercise. I don't need fancy equipment. I'm going to start to walk more. And that's a good start of an exercise program or just being more physically active, is that you start to feel that your muscles are starting to become more fatigued as you do more. So this is a continuum from left to right. As a person with MS begins to walk, so far everything starts to play out pretty well. So you start walking, and here we have a green line and we have a red line. Red line is the muscle fatigue that occurs, and then the opposite over time as you start to walk. Let's say this is from you start to walk to about maybe 5-10 minutes into the walk. And all of a sudden you start to feel like let's say your right foot starts to slap a little bit more, or you feel like that right foot starts to drag a little bit more. That red line starts to go up. So you start to get more fatigue in that leg. But then what happens is that your performance starts to go down. That might be your walking speed goes down, your balance gets worse. So there's an inverse relationship, increased muscle fatigue, poor performance. So as you get a bigger spread in that, and you have a bigger delta between that, then you're going to have the inability to come back to baseline. So the longer you wait to rest, it's going to take you longer to get back to where you were with your muscles not as fatigued and your performance not as hindered. And that's what that drawn out lines are. And eventually you will come back down to where you recovered. However, if you start to introduce more rest periods, so before this delta becomes even bigger here, you insert a rest, maybe a minute and a half, not very long, let the muscles relax a little bit, and then move on and start to walk again. You will reduce the amount of recovery time and the reduction of performance. And as a result, the more you do that, you can then gain ability to not have the split happen so early on in your walking. That means that your muscles are becoming more conditioned. But as a person with MS, it's a bit of a phenomenon that it's like, well, in 5, 10, 15 minutes, my MS didn't get worse. So why is my right leg starting to fatigue out? Well, it's that you have premature fatigability in your muscles, but you also can gain endurance and strength as long as you abide by making sure you do not bring your muscles to failure. As soon as you start to have more of a foot drop, a foot drag, or any other muscles that start to fail, it's already indicating that you're giving failure to that muscle, and it's going to have a harder time to recover and come back down to baseline. And thus, having more breaks that are shorter periods during your walking, you're going to improve your performance and decrease the adverse effect of muscle fatigue and gain health by being more physically active. So just by being more physically active, can be extremely improving your health. Because what the new adage out there now is that sitting is the new smoking. So the new rule is that about 20, 30 minutes of static sitting is okay, but you need to get up and move around a little bit. So if you have 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours of continuous inactivity, your health degrades during that time. But if you split up and just think about not maybe gaining more activity, but what about just reducing the amount of sedentary, sitting still and not moving? However, even if you're in a wheelchair, you have inability to walk, what about moving arms, moving your trunk, rotating your trunk? Moving any part of your body is physical activity. So if you're non-ambulatory, just move whatever limbs you can to get more physical activity during that time and abide by these same rules. You're going to gain health over time. So the blue line indicates that if you start to improve your activity, you are pushing up your health status line. And so then you have the positive delta that you want is that original red line that you aren't doing a darn thing about your health as far as physical activity wise, but you started to engage in more physical activity. So early on, when that split started happening and you're improving your overall activity, those purple lines are indicators of a positive lift of your physical or your health status during improving your health span at the same time of probably improving your lifespan as well. So health benefits. So, the organs is what we like to call them, the heart, the lungs, even our skin is an organ. And physical activity, exercise, definitely helps in preventative heart disease, pulmonary lung disease, and other conditions like diabetes that are obviously preventable. So certain organs can benefit from more physical activity. So as a person with MS, you are a person. So you are going to benefit health-wise completely separate from MS, just like any human being would. But also just like any human being, we would like to have better brain health. So that is an extremely important organ. And there are models that are being created in neurological conditions, even such as Alzheimer's, dementia, and now currently we're starting to build in more in MS, of a direct link between heart health and brain health. And one way that our brain gets more healthy is through physical activity. And when exercising the heart on a more regular basis, you release a protein, which I like to call the fertilizer for the brain, which the fancy term, and we'll just abbreviate it, is BDNF. So they are neurotrophic factors that allow your brain to be protected, to be healthier, and could be seen as possibly a disease modifier for MS as well. So other, symptom-wise, the benefits that are increasing good outcomes, quality of life, vitality, self-esteem, and decreasing bad symptoms of fatigue and depression. So it's a really nice realm to have better health, but also a better mood along with that. So I've been using this slide and the study by Dr. White from over a decade now. And the benefits of exercise in MS is not just me spilling it out as, well, what I recommend, but the experts in the field of MS and research and clinical care, knowing that the benefits of and the roles of exercise, again, can enhance other factors like functional activity and reduce, again, like I said, fatigue and depression, but then also the brain health. And the really interesting term there is neurogenesis. So neurogenesis is the ability of the neurological system to actually gain new cells. So that's a really interesting concept of pushing back against the age-related and disease-related reduction of brain cells and neurological cells centrally in the body, and thus you can actually improve your brain health by replacing some of the cells that have been lost. So that's a really hot area of research right now, a little bit more in animal research, but moving into the human research as well. And then as it relates to MS, more specifically about the anti and pro-inflammatory, but enhancing those that are more damaging to the brain and to the body, and then also reducing those that actually can help then open up the gates to a more healthy brain and neurological system, and then obviously leading to decreasing disability level. And the bottom line indicator, I think in all of us, is if I can have a better quality of life to the last day I have on this earth, I think that's the biggest goal for us. And exercise can enhance that. So borrowing from our neighbors up north, it's a pretty straightforward, a little bit more condensed than the previous slide that showed 150 minutes, blah, 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 per week, that it comes down to about 30 minutes of moderate intensity of aerobic exercise, about 2 times per week, in strength training about 2 times per week as well. And we'll get into a bit more specifics on what I recommend, and it looks beyond this because it's a pretty superficial recommendation. But again, it's a recommendation for people specifically with MS. So the green line. So the green line is what could happen if you engage in more purposeful, maybe more organized, and more progressive exercise program. So as you add on beyond starting with just generally decreasing the amount of sedentary sitting or lack of movement activity during the day by moving around the house, around the neighborhood, however, increasing to the point where you're adding exercise to it, you can push your health status up and then increasing your health span and probably also your lifespan along with that. So again, you're pushing it up, you're pushing it up, you're pushing it up, but it takes you to be the champion of that with some guidance from professionals. So endurance training, exercise that is related to targeting the heart and the lungs, and the modes could be walking, running, cycling, and others could be moving your arms. If your legs are not working to the point where you cannot walk, you can move your trunk. If you move and rotate your trunk more than just sitting there, sit away from the back of the chair and lift your arms, rotate your head, you're probably going to see that your heart rate actually goes up. As long as your heart rate goes up from the time when you're sitting still to the time that you're moving your body for even just 30 seconds, you have done something to improve your health and your health span. So being purposeful about it is extremely important. So the intensity is somewhat hard, and the effort is something that could be monitored by heart rate, but sometimes you might need to have a screening by a professional that determines if your heart rate is a viable or a valid indicator of intensity. Because with some people with MS, the autonomic nervous system that automatically regulates heart rate in response to exercise could be hindered and not give you accurate information. So you might have to think about it. How does it feel? Does it feel somewhat hard while I'm doing this? Is it harder than just sitting still? I think that's a good start. Duration, your target. Now, this is the daunting number right here. 30 to 45 minutes. It's like, are you kidding me? You want me to start with 30 minutes? No, this is your target to get to. So it might be 3 minutes. It might be 2 minutes. It might be 5 minutes. And you do that on a regular basis. You chip away at it. You chip away at it. This is a marathon as far as changing your behavior. or adjusting your behavior. This is not a sprint. So do not get frustrated with, well, there's no way in heck I'm going to be able to do 30 minutes, so I'm not going to do it. That is what goes wrong with people suggesting these numbers. But this is where maybe in a year, maybe in 2 years, you have your ability to get to 30 minutes of exercise per day. As long as you're reducing your sedentary sitting still, not moving any limb whatsoever, and you're starting to reduce that number, adding more physical activity, you're on a great start. And then intervals, again, as I played out in that first diagram of walking and how your muscles can get fatigued if you continue and continue and continue, the interval would be to stop. So for this, it might be that you do 1 or 2 minutes of getting your heart rate up and rest for 30 seconds. Then 1 to 2 minutes and then rest for 30 seconds. And then again, and you go on. Your goal then is to get to where you could do 5 minutes at a time, then rest, then 10 minutes. Now we're talking months and maybe years until you get to the point where you're doing continuously 30 to 45 minutes per day. And the frequency, 2 days a week to could be 7 days a week. Yes, forever. So the other way that, again, that somewhat hard area could be a scale that Dr. Borg back in 1998 thought he would really kind of mess with the American mind and not make a scale that's 0 to 10, like we always like, and he created a 6 to 20 scale. So we'll go with it. As long as we understand that if you are moving more than sitting and you can get yourself to where you feel like you're from a 6 to about a 9 initially, then you can get yourself to a 12. You're in that realm of being able to have the benefits of physical activity, especially on your brain. Strength training, as your muscles become weaker, possibly with MS, and then also with age. So there's what's called sarcopenia. And that's what every human being goes through at some given point in their life. And it actually starts at the late second decade of our life as we start to reduce muscle mass and muscle strength. And yes, if you don't do anything about it, you're going to get weaker. So you have to do something purposeful as a human being to improve your muscle. And this is for males, females, does not matter. Muscle function, muscle strength, and some mass as well. And then on top of that is that MS, as you know, is something that weakens the muscle even more. So arms, legs, core, which is trunk, which would be the abdominals, the lower back, the upper back. Stationary machines can be very beneficial for safety if you have access to them. Hand weights, cuff weights, anything like that can be very beneficial. And again, the intensity is somewhat hard effort. And I termed the concept of feel and look. So your last repetition, so you might only do 1 repetition. So when you look down there at duration of 1 set to 2 set, of one set or a set is made up of repetitions. So even if you're starting off with just 1 set, 1 rep, that's okay. And it's going to give you benefit because the rule of thumb is if you can move through the full range of, let's say, you're lifting a weight with your hand and your elbow is bending and you're doing what's called a bicep curl, that as you're coming up, you want to move through that full range of motion that you established the first time. It feels more effortful on that last repetition. Let's say you're doing 2 or 3 repetitions. Your third repetition should feel like, wow, that was harder, noticeably harder than the first one. However, it looked as good as the first one. So it moved through the full range of motion. So when doing strength training, make sure you are not bringing your muscles to fatigue. That is an extreme misnomer when exercising for strength, especially with people with MS. And I think that was where we started to get down the wrong road several decades ago, that it was actually stated that don't exercise because your muscles get too fatigued. You're getting worse. Yes, well, then doing it worse gets you worse. So let's do it better in making sure that you have success with your exercise repetitions, whatever muscles that you're focusing on, and making sure that you have the time to build up to 1 to 2 sets and no more than 20 repetitions for that. Then you start to add on more weight and you bring down your repetitions. And this is where a little bit of guidance from a skilled exercise specialist could help. And you don't need that on a daily basis, maybe, but maybe on a quarterly and or yearly basis to make sure that you're on the right track of doing the right thing for progressing your exercise program. And again, 2 to 7 days per week forever. And if you wanted to work certain muscles that you feel are more beneficial for ambulation, could be the trunk, and then also the muscles of the legs that you feel are weaker because of MS, just know that you can exercise the stronger leg, let's say, as much as it can, but the other leg that might be weaker, you exercise it maybe differently, not maybe, exercise it differently to a certain level. It's still going to get the benefit, but do not try to have it match the stronger leg and really overwork it. Again, another route that you don't want to go down. So you might have to exercise your limbs differently because of the phenomenon of MS, to where it might be your right leg and your left arm that are the ones that are weaker. And it's something that's pretty common. So knowing that, yes, you have probably a pair of arms and a pair of legs, and however, they might not function the same. So exercise them possibly differently. And I'd like to share these slides, which I have now for years, because it shows, I think everybody kind of knows what the EDSS is. It's a standard disability scale that's heavily weighted in ambulation, specifically for people with MS. So it comes from the neurological exam. A higher score, so on this one, when you go up to EDSS of 9, which is the lighter gray individuals, that they had one person in this group that did exercise specifically to improve arm strength, and those compared to other disability levels that were more moderate. And then on the top there in the more solid line is less disabled individuals with MS, or more functional, let's say. So as they exercised over 3 months, that's that bottom line down there, they started exercise from the left at baseline, 3 months of exercising for strength training, 6 months out, a continued trend of improving strength, which is the resistance of pounds on the left from 15 to 40, they were able to have improved strength over time. The really cool thing about this one is if you look at the two groups that were moderate and then also more severe disability, is that they basically, with effort over 6 months of period of time, they were at where a person with less disability with MS that did not start exercising yet, they got to the level of their baseline. And then if we look at leg strength, same trend. It almost looks exactly the same as upper extremity strengthening, lower extremity strengthening. Leg extension is straightening your leg out at the knee. So what's said there is, that looks like sort of reversing disability in people with MS. So I'd like to share that slide, these two slides that show it is possible not only to gain strength, but it's able to be gained in individuals that historically have been thought of, well, you have such a high level of disability in MS, you cannot gain any benefit from exercise. And this slide, amongst other slides and other diagrams, have shown that with people with MS, strength, endurance, and health in reduction of disability can be had, but it takes purposeful and guided behavioral change or enhancement of your behavior in a more physically active and exercise-filled life. So this is a picture of Cancun, which We were going to go this year, but we can't, but that's okay. But, you know, it's, you know, kind of a horizon, and it's a span of our future. If we just take a hold of it, that we can move forward and we can feel good about ourselves if we do something that we know is going to be beneficial. And that would be in this talk specifically about exercise and physical activity and how it affects your body, preventative diseases, and improving your brain health. And yes, the potential to reduce disability if you have gained disability due to MS. I just want to thank you for your time, and I hope that I receive some questions that I can respond to in the future. Thank you.